Since Season 4 began, we've attempted to record every single run that we've done that has appeared on the channel in a document showing everything you would need to know about it, including the dungeon, the level, the weeks, the affixes, what healer we had, and what amount of DPS we had. I've been working on this for a while now. I didn't start at the beginning of the season, so a lot of these links are actually links to live streams where they did happen, but later on in the season you will find links to individual YouTube videos that you can watch and comment on. This is going to be a major feature of Shadowlands on this channel, and I don't think anyone else is doing this. I wish more people were doing this, because what we're taking a look at today is the accumulation of the statistics that I have compiled here. Now, before we start, this is not every single run I ran, okay? In fact, I did, it says 549 runs, that's 548 runs total. That is across multiple classes and at multiple times in the expansion. So the statistic that we're going to look at today are just from Blood Death Knight. Most of the other times I played alts, it was either really early in the season or just kind of not seriously, so there was nothing really to be gained there. Plus I didn't want to have to collect tank statistics on top of it. So, but yeah, the main thing to note here is that this isn't every single run I ran, but the ones that I didn't run on stream were usually never pugs. Or if they were kind of just low, not interesting pugs, runs that I was running just for a specific reason, maybe to get gear, especially in the early part of the season, or also just to help friends or guildies. And then we also ran, a fair amount of keys with like a set group of people that I had been running with for a couple weeks there. So some of my best keys are not included on this list, but this is all about pugging, and it's all about learning what you can from pugging and getting better. And I think getting the complication of stats is going to be really important when you're trying to figure out what went wrong, or what can be learned for the future. So without further ado, on this page here you will see a bunch of different statistical compilations. Now, I'm not a statistician by any means. I have some problems with math as it is, so I tried my best here. If anybody wants to take this and run with it, you're welcome to do so. Just let me know what I can do to, document you doing so. But anyway, we're going to take a look at it all, and I'm going to discuss and give my opinions on it all. So first thing you'll see, total runs. That is the number that we had on Blood Death Knight. Okay, so we had 441 keys entered as a Blood Death Knight. Now, many people, if you're watching this for the first time, or you're new to the channel in some way, you might not realize that we count every single key. So website like Raider.io, they don't care about any of that. If you don't finish the key, it does not count. So if you looked at Raider.io, you would see 166 less runs on my page than, or well, more than that because of the changes we talked about. But regardless, yeah, 166 upgrades and 166 disbands, which I think is kind of funny. I actually had the same number of disbands as we did upgrades, and that is 37.64% of all keys we did. And then we also had 109 completions, and that's just running a key that does not upgrade, but you actually finish it, and you should do that more often because it gives loot, at least in BFA. I had a good option to get some loot and AP and stuff like that. We'll see what it looks like in Shadowlands. But anyway, then I have this a couple times in the run, or in the spreadsheet here. So we're calling finished keys. That's upgrades plus completions. All right, that's you enter the key and you completed it to the end. Whether or not it was in time is irrelevant. And then we have depleted keys, which is completions plus disbands, basically not upgrades. A lot of people are very focused on that too, because it means that even though you did the key went downward, or it did not advance. So either because of a disband or a completion. 62%. Okay, so let's take a look at more specific stats. We have a lot of very specific stats. So weekly, week 1, I have it on another document here. Okay, so if you haven't seen this document, there's a link. Every one of these will go to this document, and then I have from a while back showing my routes and stuff like this. But so week 1 was bolstering Grievous, fortified bolstering Grievous. Okay, now not everybody uses the same weekly designation. I'm pretty sure that this designation is like what Blizzard might use, though. I think this is the first week of the expansion. So I don't know if that necessarily is something that anybody cares about. Most people would probably look at it as the first week of the season, which I did not take into account. But I also graded the week, so you could reference our success based on that if you want. But anyway, so week 1, we did, you can see the totals here. Okay, so week 1, which was bolstering Grievous week, I did 25 keys. Okay, then week 2 we did 34, 28, 30. This week here, these weeks here, we did a lot of keys. So let's take a look. Week 5 and 6. So that is week 5 and 6. I'm surprised by it. We did one really easy week. Fortified, bolstering, skittish, extremely easy week. And we also did tyrannical, bursting, necrotic, which I'm surprised by because that's probably my least favorite week. We actually did the most keys, not the most, but we did a high amount of keys on this week and a high amount of keys on this week. The most keys we did this whole season, though, week-wise, was week 9, and that was a extremely easy week. Fortified, bursting, volcanic. So we probably, made sure we got extra keys in that week. Probably even did more keys off-stream that week, so it'd be even higher. But as you see, in terms of upgrades, it's also dramatically higher than every other one. So this is something that should confirm the fact that this week was a really good week to push Fortified, Bursting, Volcanic. Now, of course, all of this is changing in Shadowlands. The weeks are going to be completely different. So nothing necessarily comparing, but obviously you could see anytime Volcanic appears, it's going to be really good. In fact, when was the other time Volcanic appeared? It appeared on week 4. So let's see week 4 stats. Yeah, so week 4 stats were... Actually, I didn't do a lot of keys that week for some reason. But they are lower than I expected. Only 9 upgrades. And we'll take a look at the percentages too. But yeah, so you see week 9 clearly a very easy week. A high favored week. And the stats support it, I think. The fact that we only had 13 disbands. So let's take a look at the actual percentages now. So in terms of the upgrade, it looks like the highest percentage upgrade we had was week 7. Which was... another easy week, Quacking, Sanguine, and Fortified. And we had for week 9 as well, above 50%, 54%. So yeah, as we said, week 9, high percentage of upgrades on that week. Of course, this was 53 keys compared to 31 keys. So there's a big sample size difference there, which may contribute to a part of it. Anything over 45 is probably pretty good, though, for what we've seen. In terms of the completion percentage, I don't think there's much to be valued here. It's just maybe a cross-reference against Disband. You could learn something. The big thing is maybe looking at Disband, though. 64% of the keys we did on week 1, which was the hardest week. So Bolstering, Grievous, Fortified was the Disband. So there you go. You see the trends are coming together. Let's put it that way. 64% of the keys we did were not an upgrade or were not finished, and then there's deplete and finish here too. So so depleted 72% for that week. Another high one here, 76%. Wow. But it's weird. Oh, look at this. This is an interesting one here because if you look at the disband percentage, 64% for this week, and then it's only 39% disband. But the thing is, 39, almost 40% of the keys we did that week were only completions. So this is week 6, and that's the week we were just talking about. It is a hard week, but we did a lot of keys that week, and we did have some success, but we did not have a lot of upgrades. So our overall 76.09% were depleted that week, and only 60% of them were finished. So that's pretty damn good compared to this week, where only 36% of the keys were finished. And then we have another really high one here, 72, 74. A lot of depletes this week. That is week 8. Week 8 is another hard week, explosive, bolstering, tyrannical. So I think you're going to see that the keys with the highest percent finish rate are going to be probably on the easiest weeks. And I think, you will see that pretty clearly here. So realistically, it's nothing groundbreaking, but I do like to see the actual numbers because especially when you're looking at the amount of disbands out of 166, you can see it's really kind of wild. Like some of the highest disband rates weren't even the weeks that I did the highest. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of nuts if you look at these percentages. 64% of the keys were disbands, and I only did 25 keys that week. So you could have a look at that and draw your own conclusions. Now here we go into representation, which is one of the main things I wanted to take a look at today, and I'm really excited to see what we have here. Okay, so for DPS, this is how we did it. We first of all just raw representation. This is how many Death Knight DPS appeared in keys, and the total percentage is a total of how many actually slots could appear. Okay, so this is like since you could have 3 DPS per slot, this is how many people appeared total across all the 3 DPS slots, and this is the percentage of them. So no surprise, you're going to see a really high amount of Demon Hunters and Hunters. 21% of all groups DPS were Demon Hunters. Only under 20% were Hunters. So Demon Hunter was actually more popular for us than Hunter, which I'm surprised by, because at the end of the season, especially, Hunter really took over and Demon Hunter kind of fell away. But you see some really small amounts of, percentage of monks, 26%. So only 2% of the DPS seen in any keys were monks. And that's actually the lowest, 26 total monks we played with. So again, if you want to see all the monks, you can go over to the spreadsheet, make it so you're only searching by monks, get rid of the blanks, and here is every single key by monk. You can search for that and look at how a Windwalker played in all these keys. Like, this is why this spreadsheet is so good, because you can literally do whatever if you want to learn about something specific that appeared on the channel, you could do it. It's all here, okay? But so anyway, the main thing to take away from this is yet to come, but you see a lot of Demon Hunters and a lot of Hunters, and whether or not we were successful with them, we're going to take a look at. Now, Druid Healer obviously dominated, okay? 42, almost 43% of all keys done were Druid Healers. How wild is that? 30% were Paladins, and then you see Holy Priest, Disciplined Priest, Shaman, and Monk actually add up to less than Paladin. So the rest of the slots all add up to lower than 3rd place, which is kind of crazy. Anyway, what we want to definitely see here is how many times did they appear per key, because this is total, like, out of 1,326 actual DPS slots that were available, this is the percentage. But instead, you might want to see how many times did a Death Knight appear in a key at all? How many times did a Druid appear in a key at all? Because if you see, it might be slightly different. Like, for example, Demon Hunters, 256 keys had a Demon Hunter in them, but we had 276 Demon Hunters. So that means that 19 of those keys had more than one Demon Hunter in them. So you could look at that on the sheet too if you want to see how many runs did we have with more than one Demon Hunter. And actually, there was one run with 3 Demon Hunters. That's the only time there was a run with 3 of the same spec all season. So pretty cool. But yeah, you'll see that a lot of, so you might want to look at the actual stats of this, like, oh, a Warlock appeared 40 times, a Paladin appeared 35 times, etc. You might learn something from that. But obviously, again, we see Demon Hunter and Hunter appearing, and this time Hunter appearing way higher. 58.05% of all keys that we did had a Demon Hunter DPS appear in them. And but the highest percent of multiple, you see, this is pretty cool. The highest percent of multiple classes is actually Hunter. We saw a lot of keys, 29 keys with 2 Hunters. I don't think we saw any 3 Hunters, yeah. But yeah, so 53% of all keys had a Hunter in them, but 6.58% of keys had more than 1 Hunter in them. So, again, something you might think about for the future, how this impacts the key rate. But here we go. This is where the meat gets, we really start to learn, okay? So here is talking about actual success now, okay? So we're talking about first upgrades, okay? So I could have extrapolated this. Upgrades, completions, disbands, what we talked about, finished keys, and also depleted keys. But it takes so goddamn long. I didn't want to do it, okay? So here is this is like the real reason to do this, okay? So every time a DK appeared, so here's, first of all, just the raw stats. 13 times during upgrades, a DK appeared. 91 times a Demon Hunter appeared. 84 times a Hunter appeared. A Monk appeared only 11 times. 13. Paladin 11 times. So these are 2 very different things here, okay? So let's talk about this. So this is how many upgrades contained a Death Knight, percentage-wise. So 7.83% of upgrades contained a Death Knight DPS. How about almost 55% of upgrades contained a Demon Hunter DPS. Now, of course, it's freaking 8 times more players, but 54% of the time. So that's pretty good. But what you might want to see instead is the percentage of the impact of these slots. Okay, this is far more important and something that you should take away and learn from, okay? So what this means is how many times did a Demon Hunter appear, or Death Knight in this case, appear versus how many times did they appear in an upgrade. Okay, so that means out of the 41 Death Knights, 13 of their appearances were an upgrade. That is only 31.71%. Okay, that is actually the lowest, I think. No, there's one even slightly lower, but yeah. So only 30% of the time a Death Knight appeared, it contributed to the upgrade of the key. Now that doesn't mean much because of course there's multiple players in the group. Looking at the healers is better. If I wasn't a tank, looking at the tanks would be better, even better. But you can start to see some real trends here, and this is a very important thing to take note of. So you see DK, from at least the keys I did, certainly was not a good pick this season. And there could be a variety of reasons for that, but I think it was just lacking a niche. You know, DK DPS just didn't bring anything specific to the key, and they just have no real value in there. So maybe on average, they contributed less overall, but it also could be a function of the meta. Like you could take this and look at it the opposite of some people, right? You could say like, oh, the reason, this is why the meta is this way. You know, like look at how bad they played, how bad their performance was, how bad their contribution was. Or you could be like, huh, look, you could do the opposite. Like look at Monk. God, yo, look at this dude. 50% of the times a Monk appeared, they contributed to the upgrade of a key. So you could start looking for a silver lining there. You could say, well, Monks are really actually undervalued. They did good damage, very consistent AoE throughout the whole season. They had good burst single target. Not a bad thing at all for 5-mans, especially on some weeks. They brought a physical damage buff, which is really good this season because, of course, a lot of physical damage healers, including BM Hunter, topping the representation. They also brought things like Ring of Peace and good utility. So you could start finding reasons why Monk are 50%. You know what I mean? They're actually the highest. But I think it's even more important to take a look at the differences in the most represented ones. So this is very interesting to me because we see 55% of the keys that were upgraded contained a Demon Hunter. That's a staggering number. 55% of all upgrades were containing a Demon Hunter, okay? But look at this. Out of all the times a Demon Hunter appeared, only 35% of the time did they contribute to that upgrade. So it's very interesting because you start to see like, wow, the most populated classes are just the most populated classes. It's not actually statistically significant. In fact, if you look, both Demon Hunter and Hunter is slightly better. So both Demon Hunter and Hunter are, kind of average. They're like, oh, okay, well, we ran a lot with them, so maybe that skews the results. Obviously, when you have 91 compared to 13, it does. Of course, this is not perfect, but it is interesting to see, like, we didn't actually have as much success per Demon Hunter as I thought we did. And then you start to see things like this here, where Rogue is actually 40%. You know what I mean? And I didn't really enjoy playing with Rogue much this season. But they bring a lot of utility. They bring things like Shroud to make up for mistakes maybe with the obelisks or something else along the way. They do bring a lot. They certainly bring a lot. So you would think, well, Demon Hunter brings a lot. Why are they slightly lower impact than Rogue? It might just be because of player mentality, unfortunately. You know, you start to make those types of assumptions, and this is why statistics are really cool to look at. So, but then you see Warrior too. Warrior's a really good pick. I think Warrior, I was down on Warrior the whole time because they didn't bring anything. But what they did bring was really consistent AoE DPS. They had really good AoE the whole expansion. And that should be important to people moving forward because they were one of 2 DPS specs in the game with significant AoE caps. Yet they were still very successful. And I think this is the number that you want to see. 42 compared to 41. That means that the class was actually contributing, right? When you see that, when you see 8 to 35, that's when there's like a lot of statistical, fluff and things aren't going well. Or when you see 50 to 35, then you're like, maybe Hunter wasn't as good as I thought it was, stuff like that. But when you see 42 to 41, then you're like, Warrior was exactly as good as I thought they were. Me personally, I didn't expect them to do this well, but they brought very consistent AoE the whole time. They had average bulk, and they did what they needed to do. They focused on the right things, and we had success with Warrior. So, but yeah, then you see things like Shaman, and I think some of these higher percentages, even though they're likely skewed by small sample size, you'll see that it's because these classes are underrepresented that the players are maybe trying a little bit harder, like especially Priest, Shaman, and Warlock. These things being where they're at, you start to think like, oh, when you invite a shaman, especially, that guy really appreciates the invite. So maybe not anything significant, but still interesting to see. And the main one that we were talking about the whole expansion was mage. And the stats proved me wrong. I said mage was going to substantially, it was going to have a weak impact, a weaker impact than I expected it to, or than people expected it to, but that's just not true. It's actually above average. So, or it's pretty average compared to the number that we got. So 32% of keys that contained a mage upgraded, and 37% of the time a mage appeared, it contributed to the upgrade. So pretty cool. But healer is a lot more. You could learn a lot more from healer because it's the only healer. There's not two other people carrying it. Like, you know, half the time we had a mage, there might be 2 hunters carrying the mage, you know, so you don't know for sure. But healer, you know for sure. And since these are all done on Blood DK, we know what we can extrapolate from this. All of the things I've been saying are true here. We see Paladin absolutely having a higher impact on my keys than any other spec. And, Druid's up there too, 38%. And that's proof that it was a strong healer. But if you look at the classes that were underrepresented, 31, 30, 30, and 33. So Shaman, again, looks like it really works well. So I think what you can learn here is that Paladin is really high synergy with Blood Death Knight. And in fact, you could look at this again. So this is higher percentage of keys, and that's just because there's so many druids. But look at, they didn't necessarily have the highest impact. So Paladins, even though we had less of them, we had a much higher impact, and way higher than Druid too, realistically, compared to the sample size. So that's pretty nice. And I think Shaman was probably the unsung hero, even though we had a lot more monks. And, they did all right. We had Shaman at way lower rate, and they were higher impact. So I think Shaman is an underrated healer for 5-mans, especially alongside Blood Death Knight because of the utility they bring. But I think Paladin is tier 1, number 1 in my book for that, because they bring so much offense and so much outside of healing that it's almost a no-brainer when you're playing with a tank that doesn't need a lot of healing. But that's not all we want to look at. Let's take a look at the disbands. So this is another topic that we talked a lot about. Which keys disbanded? Now, I know I said months ago that I was going to take a look at every single disband, and I was going to assign a evaluation to it. That's 166 keys, guys. If you really want to see that, comment below. I'll do a separate video on it, but I can't do it in this video. It's going to be like a 2-hour video, basically. So we'll do that if people really want me to. I don't know if anybody would want to watch like a 2 or 3 hour video on that, though. So anyway, disbands. Let's take a look. Again, these are all the people, the amount of time somebody appeared in a disband. Here's the percentage, and then here is the impact. So again, you could look at impacts, big. Now this is the opposite, right? So you start to see Demon Hunter, 62% appearance, but only 40% impact. So that's like, oh, okay. So that, like, things start to flip. So like we saw Demon Hunter actually appeared a lot, but didn't contribute to the upgrade as much as some classes. Where in this rate, they didn't contribute to the disband as much as some classes, So like, for example, DK really lines up. It appeared almost equally, but its impact on the disband is way higher percentage-wise and on average than its impact on the upgrade. So unfortunately, I think it's a pretty clear conclusion that Death Knight was a very bad pick for us in Season 4 for whatever reason in our keys. And again, small sample size, we had very bad success. They didn't contribute a lot to the upgrade, and they contributed a lot to the downgrade just by statistics. But then you see Demon Hunter. They didn't contribute a ton to the upgrade as much as you would hope, but they didn't contribute a ton to the downgrade either, the disband either, because that really, I think that's a testament to how bulky they were, how few deaths likely the class could provide theoretically. Obviously, individuals vary, but you would see that a lot more. So, and then you see like other classes like Druid and stuff, and then Monk, look at this. So this is further success that we have with Monk, proving that I think Monk was an underrated pick this season, at least for us. We had only 26%. Yeah, that's a really low impact. That's the lowest out of this range here. And I think it really does show you Monk was actually a really good pick this season, and then they were just slept on, at least for me. And maybe, the problem is nobody else compiles these statistics. Raider.io doesn't do it either, unfortunately. They do not compile disbands. So you could look at, on Raider.io, maybe you could look at how much of an impact each upgrade DPS had, but you can't look at it across from disbands. So you can't see the whole picture, and that's why I wanted to do this. But I think, Hunter and Demon Hunter, being so, you know, they were good picks. They were good picks overall. It's just that they weren't as good at being great as people thought they were, at least in Pugs. A lot of people playing them flavor of the month here. So, but in general, you see the classes that, you know, maybe looked like they were struggling this season. They did pretty good. And Warrior, again, remains very stable. 34% percentage and only 33% impact. So, I mean, this is really good. I was wondering if we were going to see anything in like the 60s, 70s, but nothing. I wouldn't say anything statistically huge. I mean, seeing a couple 20s and then a couple 40s, I wouldn't really say that's a big difference. So, but maybe the one that, again, that we talked about the most was Mage. And I was just wrong the whole time. Mage, you know, they didn't significantly contribute to disbands, and they were more statistically valuable in upgrades than I gave them credit for. Maybe what we should have looked at was completions, because the amount of times mages didn't complete the key, I don't know, maybe that would have been interesting. But yeah, for me, the big swings were definitely the more flavor of the month classes. And even though Mage was highly represented compared to some classes, it actually was very good. In fact, in this case, it was look at almost extremely similar to Rogue, which we know to have performed well in the upgrades. But Rogue contributed slightly more to the disbands. So interesting stuff. And then again, healers. So this is healer impact. So here you see, actually, Paladin did contribute more to the impact on disbands than Druid did. So that makes Druid a better average healer, mostly also because of how often they appeared. It's, I guess, just more likely. But regardless, Paladin did have slightly lower success rate in keys, even though we saw that they contributed more to impact on upgrade. And I think that's because, like, a good Paladin is going to have a huge impact on the dungeon. But, you know, a Paladin that plays poorly might slightly be worse than a Druid. But then, of course, we see the classes that really shamaned. The classes that really struggled were the ones that contributed the most to the downgrades. So, yeah, you know, the meta can be confirmed by this. Like, even though sample size isn't equal, it does statistically look like the classes that were the weakest were the ones that were also the ones that contributed the most to failing a key, you know? So, Shaman, unfortunately, 52% of Shamans contributed impact to disbands. So sadly, that's the case, but I do think Shaman also had some high upside. So, and finally, we could take a look at the dungeons, because this is another concept that I think really people need to look at. And this was one of the main things we wanted to do out of the gate. Like, this is why I started making this document in the first place, was because I wanted people to be like, hey, you know, I'm really not comfortable as Blood DK doing a Tall Dazar. Let's see how he does it, okay? Or what I can learn from him doing it. So you could look at it by dungeon, of course, like we've shown. And then you could also look at it by week. So we actually had a famous moment here. One of the last keys of the whole season was this Under Raw here, 21. It was like a freaking 2-minute key. And the people said that my route was like non-viable, basically. So they left. Meanwhile, if you look at all the 21s, I mean, we could just do it real quick just because I want to show you how powerful this spreadsheet has been for me. We take a look at Underrot, clear, go to Underrot. Here's all the Underrots. Let's just look at the upgrades. Actually, well, first of all, let's just look at Blood DK. Clear, Blood DK, boom. And there's a bunch here, so let's take a look at 20 or higher, clear, 20, 21, 22. So there's all the keys above 20, you know, where the route would really start to matter. And you could see all the stats you would need to see. The clear moments here, we actually did a lot of underrots in the middle of the season, kind of right before we quit. We had done a serious amount of them. And ironically, this underrot that was the one that they said my route was non-viable for was on Fortified, Bolstering, and Skittish. Meanwhile, here is a Fortified, Bolstering, Skittish from July, so 3 months prior, where we upgraded the key. You know what I mean? So you tell me which one's non-viable, me or the group. But anyway, that's just stuff that you can learn, and that's why I like learning this stuff. So being able to see that as a player who's looking onto this thing, like, oh man, maybe I could see exactly what he did for that Underrot, Fortified, Bolstering, Skittish week. And I actually did a lot of keys. Look at how many times we did keys that week. So yeah, it's pretty interesting. But anyway, we have, again, a look at the dungeon. So first of all, I just want to look at the totals because this is a more telling stat than anything. We're going to go through this in depth here. So Untitled Chapter, 41. That's a lot of Untitled Chapters. And you're going to see some bad percentages from Untitled. And the reason I did so many Untitles was because it was my favorite dungeon. Like pretty much for the whole expansion. I thought it was a really easy dungeon. And it just got harder in Season 4. Like it didn't really get harder in a vacuum. But every other dungeon got easier. And I just kept trying to break that mold on Untitled. I kept thinking, no, we can do this. We had a lot of success with Untitled. But it just never really materialized. And then you see Siege of Brass, the complete opposite. Cannot stand the dungeon. I really hate the dungeon. I hope I'll never do it again, but I'm sure I'll do it at least some point. But it's just a bad dungeon overall, and we had bad success with it too. So nothing to change that mindset. Then you see Freehold and Junkyard, both 42 times. That's a fair amount of times for those dungeons, but you'll see in the stats, Freehold is actually significantly more successful than Junkyard. And I think that was because a lot of people assumed Junkyard was just this joke mode free key, and they went into it with bad mentality, whereas Freehold, they knew they had to actually play well to upgrade it, but it was easy if they did. Then we did actually a lot of King's Rest, 46, and that was even more than Freehold and Junkyard. And that was because for a lot of the dungeons, I was looking for either the mount or the weapon. I never got the mount. I had the weapon for a while. I still don't have the mount. So it's kind of crazy considering I did 46 runs and 15 plus 12, whatever that, almost, less than 30 just this season where I could have looted the mount. And then of course you assume that's 30 times 4. So we've done 100 and some runs of that dungeon this expansion, probably more than that, obviously in Mythic 0 as well. So still never got that mount. Anyway, Mother Lode, this is the clear winner for me. My favorite dungeon, one of my favorite dungeons ever to tank. Absolutely fabulous dungeon as a Blood DK. So many different mob types that Blood DK can interact with and have an impact on. Almost 60 runs, but you're going to see the percentages are really high for Mother Lode. Clearly a dungeon I was very confident in. So it really bothered me when the group tried to, change my mentality or force me into things I wasn't comfortable in, because it's pretty obvious that I had a lot of success in this key. And anytime that I didn't have success, I think it wasn't necessarily because of what I was doing. But then we see some pretty average stats here. Temple Sathralis, Shrine of the Storm, Tol Dagor. Didn't really like any of these dungeons. They weren't my favorite, but they were fine. We'll take a look at the percentages. Underrot was one that I'm surprised I did as little as I did, considering how many times we just saw it. 32 times only on Underrot. But it was a good high percentage, I think. Waycrest, another one I didn't do a lot this season. Not because I disliked it, but because I thought that the route I was trying to do was very difficult to execute. It was a very complicated dungeon, and even now I still don't feel very confident doing it. Like, I think it's the dungeon I'm the least confident in, which is funny because both Tol Dagor and Siege of Bralis I like a lot less. But you can see I actually ran it the same amount as Siege of Bralis, so kind of wild. And then Workshop 42 times. It's actually as many as Junkyard. So I think Workshop was very easy many weeks. I wish I could see how many times that was on Tyrannical versus Fortified, because obviously it was just very, very easy on Fortified compared to Tyrannical. But anyway, let's take a look at the percentages. Okay, so you're going to see immediately the first one, Untitled Chapter, lowest upgrade percentage, and it's pretty high. Like, the difference is pretty high. Like, next up is Siege of Bralis at 20%. And that's that's a big difference right there. I cannot believe that. But yeah, you see Untitled. A lot of people are saying Untitled is our hardest key this season. My stats reflect that, actually. So it's pretty, I would agree. I think Untitled was a lot harder than it should have been this season. It just didn't get any easier with the Obelisk, whereas a lot of dungeons did get easier with the Obelisk. So anyway, Siege of Bralis, 20% upgrade only. Freehold, 50% upgrade. So actually our highest... Oh, no, not even. Mother Lode's higher, but yeah. Besides Mother Lode, our highest, much higher than Junkyard even, 42% upgrade, which I'm surprised by. But that's because you see this big spike in disbands, 38%. And I think that's just because, especially those freaking shock bots, people are like, oh, I didn't get a shock bot, bro. There's no way, there's no reason to even continue living. Just gonna freaking delete my character. You know what I mean? It's like this emo bullshit that happened with this dungeon. It was unbelievable. Anyway, King's Rest, not a lot of success, even though we ran it a lot. 52% of the time we did Mother Lode, we upgraded it, though. I think that is the clear crown. I did a really good job in Mother Lode. If I was saying anything about my success this season, it would be about Mother Lode. Really a great dungeon. I loved it with the Obelisk. It made it a lot easier. I'd love to compare it to previous seasons too, but I think I had a lot of fun and a lot of success in there. And then Sethralis, marginal, 33%, not terrible. Shrine, again, confirmed as one of the harder dungeons that was existing, but it was a lot easier this season, I think, than it had been in the past. Not necessarily for me, though. There's a lot of times where that dungeon just walled us off because of certain fixes. It's really complicated to fix-wise. Toldagor, at least one of my least favorite dungeons, actually considerably more successful than Siege of Bralis, though. This dungeon, really, I disliked because it was just poorly designed. Siege of Bralis was poorly designed, and it was also stupidly hard at times. Toldagor, or Underrot, though, 40, almost 50%. That's really good. As you see, even though we didn't run a lot of Underrots compared to some dungeons, we had a high amount of success with Underrots. So again, you know, people saying I'm not doing whatever they think I should be doing, just leave it to me, man. I'll handle that part. You do what you're doing, I'll do what I'm doing, and just trust. I mean, look at the success. It's actually pretty good. So, but yeah, Waycrest, again, even though we didn't have a lot of runs in Waycrest, we still had pretty good success with it 50% of the time. And Workshop, even though we ran a lot of workshops compared to Junkyard, it was a much lower percentage upgrade, especially compared to some dungeons. So, and that I think was a lot of times because we do it on Tyrannical and people just weren't ready for Tyrannical. Also, a lot of times people overthought Junkyard, I feel like. On Fortified, they'd be like lusting on trash and a bunch of nonsense. It was just like really, really easy. I'm trying to overcomplicate the dungeon, so never felt like that was needed. But anyway, we can take a look at the disband percentages, and you will see the highest one is actually Shrine of the Storm, which I'm surprised by, not Siege of Bralis. But yeah, it's probably because of slightly higher sample size as well. But it's just a dungeon that, you know, you basically wipe on one of the bosses and that's it. That happened a lot in Season 4. You get to the second boss and the key is just done. So what other dungeons would be like that? I feel like King's Rest happened a lot, 41%. I'm surprised that some dungeons it didn't happen more than it did. Like Waycrest, only 29%, which is kind of wild considering it. But I think for the most part, you'll see like linear correlation with success. But then maybe the one to notice for sure is how many we finished, right? Because that's, even though like the disband thing is interesting, but like how many we actually finished, you know what I mean? So only 41% of Shrine of the Storms actually finished. Like that's kind of sad. Like look at all these other numbers, right? They're all above 55 or some in the 70s, right? Like 70% of Freeholds were finished. 70% of Waycrest were finished. Even, you know, above 55 is pretty good. Toldagor low. I'm surprised Siege of Bralis is as low, or is as like stable as it is. But freaking 41% of Shrine of the Storms finished. I mean, that's just so sad. Maybe something to do with what I did in the dungeon, but it's just kind of sad to see like under 50% of a key finished. Like, why are you bothering joining a key? If that's how little dungeons you plan on finishing. So anyway, yeah, some really interesting stuff here. And I think the overall, you know, the sexy number is this here. And it's actually more than I expected. You know, we finished 62% of our keys. Even though 62% of our keys were not upgraded, we also finished 62% of our keys. So that's really good. Like, I think that's satisfying. Like, if that's the case in Shadowlands, like when you look at that on paper, you're like, oh, that's good. I thought it was like 30%, honestly. Like, for real, I thought it was like only like 30% of keys were finished because there was stretches where it was just absurd. And of course, you'd have to look at when this occurred in the season. That would probably have a big impact on it. But it's just, I'm just surprised because I had a lot of really, really bad streams where there was like 6 keys and 4 of them did not finish. So that's the numbers we got. So take a look at it. This is gonna be a major part of Shadowlands. I'm gonna be recording every single run, uploading it as its own video. And you're going to be able to follow these stats real time, hopefully learn. So let me know what you're most, like, you know, what you're surprised by, what you're most interested in seeing, what you're most interested in seeing in Shadowlands, stuff like that. And that'll be it. So thanks for watching. We're going to see you in the next one.